Welcome to the 6th in USINPAC series of conference calls in advance of the 2014 elections this month and next month in India. My name is John, and I'll be the moderator for this conference call. If you are logged in through WebEx, you will have seen the instructions in your invite to submit questions. With such a large audience, we hope you understand that we cannot let everyone ask questions, which is why all of our attendees are muted. For those who have only joined through our audio portion, you may still submit questions via the Election 2014 email address or through our question bit.ly. The email address is election2014@USINPAC.com. The bit.ly is http://bit.ly/1IB1LPR. We'll be monitoring both of these portals during the call. Now, to start this special expert series conference call, I'd like to first introduce Mr. Vikram Chauhan, co-founder and strategic advisor to USINPAC. Mr. Chauhan.
Our listeners in the U.S. and good afternoon to our folks in India. Welcome to the USINPAC Election Expert Series, and we're excited in this whole series, which is going midway through, and we'll be continuing right after the elections, so please join us there. And I would like our India expert, Rabinder Sachdev, if he can introduce the first expert speaker, please. Over to you, Rabinder.
Thank you, Vikram, and once again, welcome to all our guests and listeners and to our esteemed panelists, expert speakers. We'll have two speakers today. The first one is Professor Aseem Prakash. He is a professor of political science at the University of Washington at Seattle. The second speaker will be Mr. Dipanjan Chaudhury. He is the assistant editor of political affairs at Economic Times, the newspaper in India. The first speaker, Mr. Aseem Prakash, he is also the founder of a blog which is known as IndianRajniti.com. He writes on subjects related to environmental policy, voluntary regulations, and effects of trade and foreign investments on social, labor, and human rights. He is also the author of several books, including Greening the Firm, The Politics of Corporate Environmentalism, co-author of The Voluntary Environmentalist, and several other books. He did his bachelor's in honors from Stephens College of University of Delhi and an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. Now, we invite Professor Prakash to lay out his opening remarks and comments and an overview in the next 5 or so minutes, and then we'll jump into the questions and answers which we have been getting through the week and which we would be getting right now as our conference call proceeds. Professor Prakash, your opening comments and thoughts, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you. This is Aseem Prakash from Seattle. The elections, as they're progressing, the 7 of the 10 phases are over. These are very momentous elections for several reasons. Oftentimes, the Lok Sabha elections in India are around issues, and seldom they're around personalities. So this time, it's a unique situation because the election is really about Narendra Modi. No matter what opinion we have about Mr. Modi, the fact of the matter is that he is the issue, and he embodies a certain governance style, a certain kind of approach to addressing India's meaningful challenges. And also interesting that there is a very large number of young people who joined the electorate. So the kind of campaigning we are witnessing, the use of social media, the use of all new kinds of campaigning techniques makes this election very interesting in terms of understanding how the Indian electorate is responding to the various dimensions, to the various allegations and counter-allegations, and to the broad ideas that different political parties are laying out. So on that count, I think it's very exciting. No matter what the outcome is, it is a step forward. India and Indians can be very proud that we have an election commission which is able to conduct the elections in a very efficient and a fair way. Of course, it's not perfect, but by and large, to appreciate the size of this exercise, the huge number of electorate, and how we have an electronic voting system, I think it's really wonderful that the Election Commission is able to conduct the election in a smooth and fair way. So I look forward to the comments and and hope to add my perspective to the conversation.
Sure. Thank you so much. Now, I think perhaps the first question coming your way kind of ties in with your special areas of expertise, which is the study of non-governmental movements, right? Now, the question is that the rise of the Aam Aadmi Party, which in a way kind of started out as a non-governmental movement, has brought a fresh dimension to Indian politics and polity. In your observation, what is the impact what is firstly the political and the real numbers impact which the Aam Aadmi Party could make in these elections? If you could read some estimate as to where do you think they are, how they're going to perform this time.
Right. So I think this is a good question because Aam Aadmi Party is arguably a very interesting phenomenon. But we must not forget that in India there is a history of social movements turning into political parties. In some ways, the Congress, which arose and it became a political party, arose from a social movement. It was partly a social movement and partly a political party. Similarly, if you look at 1970s, it's the JP movement that gave rise to Janata Party. So on that count, the Aam Aadmi Party is continuing the tradition in Indian politics where people are mobilized by a social movement around a particular issue. The JP movement was against corruption, and then it transformed itself into a political party. So on that count, I think it is a very positive trend, the role of Aam Aadmi Party in politics, because it has brought corruption in the mainstream, and it has also forced all political parties to take a careful look at the candidates they propose and the kind of campaigning they indulge in, including the use of social media. I am less enthusiastic about their ability to govern, given their short stint in governing Delhi, which, at least in my opinion, was disappointing. But this was their first try, so let's see how things bear out. In terms of their electoral performance, I think these elections are really quite unique. Of course, opinion polls have been projecting different things, but given the nature of the elections and the addition of the large chunk of youth vote, and not knowing how different caste and religious groups would vote, if they are able to surmount their religious and casteist identities and vote for general themes. But having said all this, I would be surprised if Aam Aadmi Party gets more than 10 seats, because their support is essentially limited to certain urban areas, especially Delhi. And as I've been following Delhi elections, I'd be very surprised if they get more than 3 seats in Delhi. So on that count, I think it's an important force. It will impose a kind of discipline on Indian political parties. It could put corruption on the mainstream agenda. And I think we should welcome the rise of new political actors that shake the political status quo.
I see. Thank you so much. I think that kind of links in also to the next question, that if, let's say, what would be the estimates or possibility of the number of exact seats this party gets, what is, in your estimation, the number of seats the BJP on its own alone, without assuming any other partner, on its own, standalone, how much do you think, where are they heading right now?
Yeah, that's an impossible question to answer, simply because the political fortunes are shifting so quickly. In my opinion, BJP would, given my assessment, if there are no drastic changes in the remaining 3 phases, the BJP on its own would get between 190 to 220 seats. That's my estimate.
I'm sorry.
And
thank you so much.
BJP, it's not the NDA here.
Okay. So that's the BJP. I think broadly, I mean, we are all going with what the opinion polls are or were saying and estimating around that. Very, very true, sir. Do you see any changes in the fortunes of the BJP ever since the election started? For example, when the election started, there were certain opinion polls going on. As the campaign has progressed, the rhetoric has also changed sometimes, or rather has definitely changed. Do you see this changing of the rhetoric kind of bringing around a slightly different result compared to what people were anticipating when the elections started?
when the elections were announced, first of all, Aam Aadmi Party was dominating the media because they were in government of Delhi, and it seems Aam Aadmi Party is the actor to watch. Second, BJP hadn't stitched up alliances in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra. So on that count, I think BJP has consolidated substantially over the last 3 months. And as Mr. Modi's rallies all over the country, it is quite amazing to see the response to his rallies in places like West Bengal, in Tamil Nadu, an area where the Bharatiya Janata Party virtually has got no presence. So on that count, Bharatiya Janata Party is on the upswing. Internally also, they seem to have sorted out their issues. The opposition from the old guard, which was quite vocal and vociferous in the initial phase, has all got taken care of. I think everybody in BJP now acknowledges that Narendra Modi is the most popular leader for the BJP. And while there is some controversy, the fact of the matter is the election is about Narendra Modi. People are, in my opinion, not necessarily voting for the BJP, but they're voting for Mr. Modi.
That is interesting. Thank you, Professor Prakash. I think now we are looking to move on some questions on bilateral or US-India relations. In your reading, how do you see US-India relations moving on once the new government is in power in India or assumes office in India?
The United States is a country of pragmatists. It's a very practical country. And similarly, one of the big qualities, an important quality of Mr. Narendra Modi is that he's a pragmatist. So I don't think Mr. Modi, or I don't expect Mr. Modi to be holding a grudge against the United States for denying him visa. And I also don't expect the United States to continue on its existing course of treating Mr. Modi differently than any other leader of a major democratic country. So on that count, I'm optimistic. Having said this, the importance of India in global affairs, the importance of India in the eyes of the United States is a function of a couple of variables. And the single most important variable is economic growth. If the new government, no matter which government is elected, is able to get back to 7 to 8% growth trajectory, is able to rationalize the laws about foreign direct investment, then India is again the darling of the West, and India is again shining. But if India continues with its anemic growth rate and does not undertake any substantial economic reform, then I think India would be treated the way it's being treated now. India is not being neglected, but India is not being given its due, given its size of the economy, given its geostrategic importance. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think strategically, in terms of long-term planning, it makes sense for India and US to engage. In politics, there are no common friends, but there are common interests. And it is very clear, at least to me, that India and US have several common interests in terms of stabilizing Asia, in terms of countering fundamentalism. Both are vibrant democracies, and both are committed to the market economy. So on that count, there is a commonality of interest, and I hope the politicians are able to sort through the short-term glitches and focus on the big picture in the long term.
So very truly said, sir. I think definitely yes. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the US is a very pragmatic country, and even India, for that matter, maybe a little bit less. And if the Indian economy performs well by reaching a run rate of 7 to 8%, that will definitely carry the momentum. But that links into a question which is coming in through the chat to us. This question is asking that there are several issues of trade disputes between the US and India, ranging from IPR to aviation to pharmaceuticals and all. And some of these issues are expected to come up for consideration within the US in the coming weeks or in the coming months. For example, the next week, I think the Super 301 talks or the discussions are to be held. Now, how could India and the US, because these are areas where there's some gaps, how could the two countries bridge these gaps?
Look, every country, if you look at relationships between even the closest allies, they have gaps. There is never 100% convergence of preferences. And that's why politics is important. The politics is about making concessions, the politics is about adjustment, and the politics is about bargaining. I don't think these are insurmountable issues. So if you look at the transatlantic dialogue which is going on for the last, 15, 20 years, trying to smooth out the trade friction between the United States and the European Union, and still a lot of frictions remain. So countries respond to their interests, they have their constituencies to cater to, and they want to get the best out of the bargaining situation. So pharmaceutical and other issues, aviation issues, all these issues can be sorted as long as we have non-ideological and pragmatic leaders. And the United States certainly, to a great extent, has pragmatic leaders. I also hope whichever government is elected in India adopts a policy of pragmatism and not of ideology and not of confrontation.
I see. No, thank you so much. Another question I think which is coming in is that probably that's much more contemporary right now. The U.S. ambassador to India has recently resigned, or let's say she has retired from public service. What kind of an ambassador do you think the U.S. should be designating now to India, and how could the U.S. expedite that process? Because oftentimes the appointment of an ambassador does take time. So what could the U.S. administration, or what could be some ideas which could maybe hurry up that process?
The United States, if Mr. Narendra Modi is elected or forms the government, the United States will have to signal that it's willing to reconsider its past stand. And it's going to give him the respect that he deserves as the Prime Minister of India. And this is, I said, if. On that count, the choice of ambassador would be very crucial. This is not an ordinary, routine appointment where one ambassador has stepped down or retired or whatsoever, and the new one has to be appointed. Because it would be important in terms of its signaling value. And this must be a person who is not carrying an ideological package. This must be a person who is able to engage Mr. Modi and the new government, able to build on commonalities and not focus on divisive issues. So I think on that count, I hope the United States, which is at the moment very distracted by Ukraine, by the collapse of talks in the Middle East, by the ongoing visit in Asia, is able to sit back and take a more thoughtful decision on how they can restructure the relationship between the United States and India. The diplomatic relationships between countries are like marriages. Marriages per se don't become successful. You have to work on that. And both sides have to put in effort. So I think it's important for the United States to take the first step, invest some thought, and try to understand what are India's concerns, especially Mr. Modi's and the new government's concern, assuming they come to power, and then have an ambassador who's able to reach out to them. I think this is very crucial.
Great. Thank you so much. I think I have one last question with you, and then we go on to our second panelist, and then we'll circle back with you, sir. This question for you is coming from Dr. Ajay Chaudhury. This question is that why does the BJP, or why does not the BJP say, when it is asked that why they mentioned in the manifesto that disenfranchised Hindus should be welcome in India, that India is the only Hindu country besides a small one like Nepal? Because the BJP is facing criticism of it, that why in its manifesto they've mentioned only disenfranchised Hindus and not other religions. So I think Dr. Chaudhury's question is that why is the BJP not saying it out loudly and loud and clear that India is the only, majority large Hindu-based country? What are your thoughts on that?
India is a secular country, and I think BJP understands this. Mr. Narendra Modi, I'm very encouraged his messages of inclusion. He's not getting distracted by religious or casteist appeals. And even when his supporters have made objectionable statements he has publicly chided with. Now, one must understand that manifestos issued by political parties in India are really quite useless. They mean nothing. It's not even a PR document. And one way to assess this is, to what extent do political leaders in their election campaigns talk about the manifesto? Which? So I'm not too worried about what BJP has said about its manifesto, because this manifesto was drafted and created in particular circumstances. I don't have the time to get into the politics of manifesto drafting. But one thing is very clear, that India should recognize, and India is recognizing, that India belongs to all. And we must have an inclusive model of governance, an inclusive model of growth, so that everybody, no matter what religion you belong to, what region you are from, what language you speak, feels there is a stake in the system. And on that note, I think India can learn a lot from the US. It's a multilingual, multi-ethnic society where the primary identity of most people, if not all, is American. And I think if India can move towards this goal, where the Indian identity is subsuming, is dominating all other identities, and people start thinking about themselves as India, including political parties, then I think it's a welcome step. So on that count, if BJP should not focus on a particular community, and if asylum has to be granted, then it should be granted to all, or it should not be granted to anybody, because this is what the future of India, the India of the 21st century, should look like.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we have one question still trailing in for you, which probably we can ask you before we move on to Dipanjan, sir. The question is that the civil nuclear accord between the US and India, it moved to a point and then it has been stuck because of the liability conditions which the Indian government has promulgated. Now, in your opinion, if the nuclear liability law in India is not amended and the US nuclear business is not able to enter or does not find the Indian market attractive, would it have a spillover effect in the other industry sectors in the US, or the business sentiment in the US of doing business with India?
Absolutely not. India offers a huge market in a variety of areas. Yes, nuclear industry is important, and especially a few firms that are able to sell turbines and other kinds of equipment are very interested that the liability issues is sorted out. But fact of the matter is, if India can get back to 7 to 8% growth trajectory, given its population size, the business opportunities are immense, and that is what the US business will respond. So I don't think the nuclear issue is make or break for Indo-US relationship.
I see. Interesting, sir. Perhaps one more, I think, I do think we have our next speaker also online with us, Mr. Dipanjan. Thank you so much, Professor Prakash. We'll circle back with you towards the end for a few minutes of wrap-up and a combined discussion between yourself and Dipanjan. Now, I'm introducing Mr. Dipanjan Roy Chaudhury. He is the Assistant Editor, Foreign Affairs of the Economic Times at Delhi. Prior to this, he was the Program Director for Foreign Policy at the Aspen Institute at India. He's earlier worked with other media organizations like Mail Today and the United News of India. He's also the author of 3 books focusing on India's neighborhood, including India's northeast of India, Bangladesh, and Kazakhstan. Dipanjan, welcome to the call, please. Please, your opening remarks, your thoughts in terms of US-India relations. But prior to that, how do you see the elections which are going on in India, and your insight, observations, please?
I think we are in for a very interesting elections where, we see that the Congress is probably staring at its worst performance in the history of independent India, and they are trying to maximize. They started on a very sticky wicket, but I believe that the Congress will recover some grounds in some Indian states of Punjab and Kerala and Karnataka and probably Assam, and try and reach a triple figure if at all they can, or if as close as to the triple figure of 100. So, they are trying to bring out in all stops in their repertoire to kind of see that, whether that can transform this anti-incumbency into some kind of somewhere by fielding some good candidates, by taking up some local issues, because nationally probably they have lost the plot and they're not being able to fight. I didn't say with one party, but with one man who is probably dominating the space. To begin with, everybody had an idea of Mr. Modi, but I think for the last 2 months, the interviews that he had given, the rallies he had seen, we have seen some obviously his rhetoric that he speaks. But if you see that he has carefully avoided any much reference to foreign relations. He went to Arunachal, he spoke about China, which is natural, any Indian leader will do. He spoke a bit on migration when he was in Assam, on Bangladesh illegal migration, that also is natural election rhetoric. He has carefully avoided a lot of issues, controversial issues in India usually, including his own status. The election is essentially in a country like India with so much of domestic issues, as usual, is being fought on the governance, on the issue of corruption, on the issue of the idea of India, as many would put that, Modi represents one idea of India and the rest represents another idea of India. So, but do we see this, I see some spark of inclusiveness in Mr. Modi, and because, running Gujarat and running a state and running, for example, running a homogeneous state like Tamil Nadu or running a state like Gujarat is not as, it's much different than running a country like India where, every day is a challenge. As some senior minister had once told me, every day running a government is 24/7/365. Winning elections is a matter of 24 hours. And this will be the biggest challenge of him. Firstly, to bring back the confidence of the domestic investors, to bring back the confidence of the international investors, particularly from the West, from East Asia, from Southeast Asia. Then winning the people's, fighting the inflation, bringing good governance. Most importantly, fighting the corruption issue, and how does it deal with that? Will it be vindictive? Will some people go to jail for namesake, or will there be, real, will it to task everybody? Because, he says that he's a single man, he doesn't have teeth and keen to promote, and, but, will his party overpower him? Will there be demands for various regional satraps, and also it has to do with the numbers, how much it gets. The less numbers that BJP gets, the more difficult it becomes for him or the BJP to run this country, in a smooth manner, because then you have to accommodate various regional satraps, and they may have a lot of demands. Sometimes may be unjustified, sometimes not be rational, and that becomes a real challenge. So it depends, how much numbers they get. At this moment, I think that a pre-poll NDA could get somewhere between 200 to 230 is my guess as of now as of date. So that leaves them with the scope for another 40 to 50 seats, and which they probably, if they have calculated, and they could get it minus some of the regional satraps like Mamata Banerjee or Jayalalitha.
Thank you so much for your opening comments. I think you kind of covered a wide range of courts. Now moving to foreign policy for a minute. How do you see the foreign policy in case there's a Modi government in India with respect to our neighborhood, and especially with respect to relations with Pakistan? What would you anticipate could be some moves the new government in India would make regarding Pakistan in the coming months, assuming it's a reasonably stable government?
Right. If you see, Mr. Bajpayee started a policy of rapprochement with Pakistan. He went to Lahore in 1999 in the bus, but the setback was the Kargil war. Then there was Agra summit, the biggest setback was the parliament attack. Despite that, he still went to Pakistan and signed an agreement with Musharraf in 2004. The same policy and a more softer policy was pursued by the UPA government and Manmohan Singh, who really believed that normalizing relations with Pakistan is in India's interest, in the region's interest, and in the global interest. And he tried tirelessly, but in 26/11 of the Mumbai attacks of 2008 was the biggest setback from which he could never recover. His Pakistan policy could never recover, despite his attempts at Sharm el-Sheikh and then Thimphu and at various places. Then there was a change of guard in Pakistan, and the new civilian government came for the first time in many years. It was the 5 years of civilian rule, after which another civilian government was voted to power. But then there were the incidents along the border, which is a peak since the ceasefire was signed, and India-Pakistan was back to in terms of square one. And also, I believe the Pakistan leadership realized that this is a lame duck government, and therefore they also refrained from taking any initiatives. apart from sending some signals through some emissaries and making noises. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's brother himself came here and met the Indian leadership. And I believe they're waiting for a new government. And the right signals have come at least from the Pakistan High Commissioner in India, who has talked about that, Mr. Modi can, lead to a, and a new era of relationship. It has to be seen, because if Modi says that he's going to pursue, as he has said in an interview to my newspaper, Economic Times, that, he will follow the Bajpayee's policy in foreign relations, then I don't see any difference. But if he wants to have a carrot and stick policy, and how much can he, manage that, depending on if he has more than 230 MPs, the pre-poll NDA, and he's in a comfortable position, then he might, if there is any kind of misadventure by any section of the Pakistan, then whether there'll be some kind of surgical strikes, one thing, if you read between the lines and between his, he said that we will not take India's prestige for granted. That leaves a room for maneuver. And if you see the BJP manifesto, that also leaves the room for maneuver in terms of good relations, but strong on counterterrorism. I think they would focus a lot on strengthening the internal infrastructure, internal security infrastructure, give a sense, because that's what we believe in terms of strengthening the national security. Now, whether we can have a national security doctrine, if the government was, we don't, unfortunately, India, in such a hostile neighborhood, with fourth largest army and with different modernization, being the world's largest importer of arms, we don't have a national policy, a national security doctrine, unfortunately. He has made it clear there will be no revisiting the nuclear doctrine. I think we should send positive signals to Pakistan and elsewhere also. And there should not be. I believe that he might like to take some new initiatives, but it would be in probably the framework which currently exists, because he has more at home to handle, rather than he can focus at this moment on too much on foreign policy, except that he would like to, maintain momentum in China relations, try to see how Pakistan behaves, and the most important is bringing back the momentum in the Indo-US relations.
So very true. I think that opens up for a discussion on Indo-US relations also right now. So what do you think is the sense in the strategic community or the potential BJP advisors or leading advisors to the potential cabinet which could be there in terms of US-India relations? Because of course, as we all know, there have been some issues, there are some issues outstanding, pending matters, big picture, small picture and all. So what is the sense that you're getting in the strategic community in India, that how would India kind of shape its US relations, US policy?
Yeah, I think there was a course correction which has already been launched, The course correction was launched when Nisha Desai visited India, and the two sides decided to go for a course correction, over whatever acrimony happened with the Kodaga episode. And a lot of issues with regard to intellectual property rights, patents, they are trying to relook at these issues. And the solar mission also, where India is threatening the US to check to the WTO. I think there are some serious relook at how to, address these kind of situations. Strategically, Afghanistan will remain a challenge to both India and US, because India has already kind of made up its mind, how looking up at a loose kind of alliance with Iran and Russia to maintain its, safeguard its interest in Afghanistan, not to allow the Taliban to have a free run. And the newspaper reports say that India has already kind of tied up with Afghanistan with Russia to supply arms to Afghanistan, to a third country, because it cannot be seen, or it doesn't want to be seen as an arms supplier to any country, and that too in Afghanistan. I believe Obama's visit to Asia, pending visit, is probably taking a US relook at this region, because I think the first 2 years of his second term in presidency had a very West Asia focus, but somewhere they lost the plot in Syria. Now Ukraine, they were thumbs down. Iran probably was their success, and now they're withdrawing from Afghanistan. So if Obama is and what he said, that Japan's safeguarding Japan's island is US interest, that would give a good positive signal to India. This is what that India, US, Japan were earlier looking at, and in terms of to head China, how they can have a loose lose, basically have a security mechanism in the East Asia and the Asia Pacific region. And that would probably, be in the strategic community is probably Obama is back in Asia. He was in South Korea, he was in Japan, particularly with these two countries. India's defense and strategic relations are growing, and there would be, these would send very positive signals here. He will be in Malaysia, and then, I believe, he would be, by being in Asia and in these parts, he is probably sending in signal where because India has a strong interest in Southeast Asia and East Asia, and that's what the fulcrum of even under the UPA government was, in terms of, to expand the strategic partnership, and there where the convergence of interest will probably again be back. But India is too big to be a US ally. It can't be a military ally to the US. It can't be seen as a military ally to the US. But I see that there will be a lot of convergence now if the US pivot is back in Asia, and India will have a role somewhere. It's not a direct and indirect role in that.
Interesting. This leads me, I think, to another question which is coming up, and which has come up actually, I think, once or twice earlier in our previous calls also. Given the situation, or the special situation of U.S. relations background with Mr. Modi, and given the fact that some of the East Asian countries, especially Japan, Korea, and of course China, have been investing and have been engaging with the Chief Minister in Gujarat, would it be kind of a soft leaning from India towards East or towards the Asian countries in case the U.S. does not take some proactive steps?
Absolutely. If the relations, a lot will also depend on whom U.S. appoints as an ambassador here, as you know better than me, right? That a lot will depend on who is. I think we need a senior and a seasoned person as an ambassador in India from the U.S. A seasoned politician, maybe a member of Congress, maybe who has the confidence of the White House and who has a confidence from the Indian leadership. That can, I think 20 to 30% take the relationship forward, because U.S. sends a message that I want this relationship. So you send a senior person here, so where he or she can move that forward. If U.S. doesn't do it, probably then they're sending a signal of indifference towards India, and that will push India more and more towards East Asia, more and more towards, then India will try and work out a relationship with China. How? Because India-China relations is all about managing. You really can't, because there is an asymmetry between India and China, and we have to accept that. We cannot go in for any misadventure, but we have to see how can we maintain the status quo, yet benefit from China in terms of the economy and investments from China that we are looking at. Modi's relations as a Chief Minister of Gujarat has been extremely well with China, extremely well with Japan, with Korea, there have been countries in Southeast Asia who have been taking a lot of interest in Modi, not investment, but they are looking at a government which encourages, because there are a lot of capital in Southeast Asia which wants to invest in India. They are looking at it. Probably then relations with Australia, a close ally of US would also grow, and because it is growing very significantly. And again, India would also try, because, for Afghanistan, India had already decided to work closely with Russia. So Moscow would also be another partner in, if the void is not filled, if the U.S. relations still continue to be cold, then, for various strategic interests, there will be different partners. India has to go for different partners then, if the U.S. is kind of creating a space in West Asia, India is also slowly thinking of how to go into the West Asia, how to become a partner of the West Asia, because there are funds that from the West Asian countries, West Asian Gulf countries can invest in India. Because there is some kind of natural synergy, historical connections there. So how can you further that? I think that it is in India's interest of both the countries that, the Indo-US relations can't be allowed to slip further, and there has to be some proactive step initially, because this U.S. government will go into elections in 2 years. From the next November, the primaries will start. So whatever they have to do between this June and the next November. And, so the window is not, window is just 1.5 years, I would say. Ambassadorial appointments and the window for 1.5 years. I think both are looking in terms of the investment, because this will be the government which will also probably, hopefully, if the government is by Mr. Modi and the signals they're going to send to the international investors, we can expect some kind of reforms here, and which can, the U.S. is essentially interested in Indian markets, and that kind of, I think the very positive is the defense side, the defense co-production. I think that could be expanded in the coming days. So that would also have a stakeholder in India from the US. So so that can take the relations. That can take the and obviously the China factor in the larger context of the regional context.
Thank you so much, Dipanjan. And I think we are now moving into the last few minutes of our conference discussion. I would like to invite Professor Prakash for a couple of questions, and Dipanjan, you before we close. Professor Prakash, you've been listening to the discussion and some of the questions which are rolling in. I have a two-part question with you. One is that any observation, any more insights, anything you would like to share with us, the audience, in the overall context of this discussion, one. And secondly, as Dipanjan was mentioning right now, some big picture ideas which could be there between US and India. So what could be some ideas wherein the US could take some proactive initiative or steps to kind of rejuvenate and bring more oxygen to this relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Vic. First, Dipanjan, thank you. These were excellent comments. So, just to boil down to distinctions, world respects India, and the United States would respect India if India does well economically. Though I don't believe in silver bullets, but if India can get back to 7 to 8% growth rate, rationalize the foreign direct investment laws, the perspective of the United States, the perspective of the global north towards India will change dramatically. And one way to assess this is see the enthusiasm for India in the early 2000s. India is shining. India is, the economist is going gaga over India. So that's something the new Indian government, no matter which political party comes to power, must seriously address. Get back to the 7 to 8% growth rate. From the perspective of the US, United States, as I said, is a pragmatic country, and it has its own political needs to cater to. So far, it has been overwhelmed by crises. So one of the interesting things, one would even venture to say one of the tragedies of the US foreign policy is that it continues to be in a reactive mode. It tried to shape events in West Asia, and unfortunately it didn't quite work out. And then Ukraine and Syria and now the problems in East Asia have taken over. So I think I agree with Dipanjan that one of the important ways to jumpstart the relationship between the United States and India is to send a high-profile person as the next ambassador who has a direct link to the White House. Because the United States now has to assure Mr. Modi, assuming he comes to power, that it's willing to play ball with him. It's willing to treat India seriously. And it recognizes that India is very important for not only stability of Asia, but even for the global politics as well. So on that count, I think it's important that the United States takes the first initiative. And I do hope and I believe that Mr. Modi will not hold grudges and will move on. He's a very pragmatic person. And of course, the United States is not the only kid on the block. There are other emerging countries with which India should and has growing relationships. And India should certainly nurture that. But fact of the matter is the United States is still the most important militarily, politically, and economically country in the world. And if India wants to benefit from the current national configuration of power, India and the United States must be willing to treat each other with respect, treat each other as allies, and most importantly, appreciate the political constraints through which the two leaderships are operating, and not make unnecessary and outlandish demands on others.
Thank you so much, Professor Prakash. Dipanjan, a question coming back to you. In fact, this has just come into the chat mode to us also. You mentioned that defense could be one big area of potential, good growth. Would you like to spend about 10, 20 seconds telling us a little bit more about that, a quick few bullet points?
Yeah. Because, definitely, because that's one area which has stood out even in this, gloomy picture in the last 2 years where the ties seem to have lost momentum. Finally, after Ash Carter's 2 visits, and, we had Prime Minister Singh and President Obama signed the joint, defense declaration, and there are few areas where I believe that they are identified and joint defense production are being launched. We don't have a clarity on that on which areas, but that is going to be a huge money spinner for the U.S. And for India to get to cutting edge technology in missile and related areas, and I think that can really synergize between, something which the U.S. did with some other countries. The defense was the pivot. Probably it could be back here, but not as a supplier and a recipient, but more as joint developer, which would increase the stake of each other in the relationship.
Great. Thank you so much, Dipanjan, for your, I think, very interesting views, which have answered quite a few of our questions which have been coming in, but I think which always open up more questions also. And thank you so much, Professor Prakash, also for your views and your time, both of our expert and eminent speakers. Now, I would invite my colleague John, the moderator for this call, for his closing remarks. And thank you so much, please. John, yours.
Thank you, Ravinder. On behalf of USINPAC's Chairman, Sanjay Puri, co-founders Mr. Vic Chauhan, Ravinder Sachdev, and Dr. Chaudhury Garg, and advisors Rita Banerjee and Sue Ghosh, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's 2014 Indian Election Series conference call. This now concludes our discussion. We hope you join us next weekend at 11 a.m. Eastern for another in our Indian Election Expert Series. You receive dial-in instructions automatically if you have already signed up previously. We look forward to continuing this conversation in the coming weeks, especially online, as we look towards U.S.-India relations and the road ahead. Please watch our USINPAC homepage and at usimpac.com and through our social media portals for these updates. Thank you again.